Thank you so much for coming today, Sabby. So obviously it was the budget, and today we're going to dive in about what it means for small businesses. But could you give us some headlines that came out of the budget that will affect small businesses?
I think if you really boil it down, especially for a small business owner, the most important thing is investment is still encouraged, but we know running a business is going to get even more expensive. We saw corporation tax stays at the 25% and full expensing plus a new 40% first year allowance still strongly reward you for investing in kit, tech and machinery. But at the same time, wage costs are going up. And so are taxes on dividends, savings, property income. So I'd say the real headline for SMBs is use the investment incentives and new skills funding aggressively. Most people who actually, and we've seen this from our own research, that people who actually think about planning, adopting technology, really make a difference to their overall, not only bottom line, but their top line growth as well.
100%. So SMBs will receive free apprenticeship training for under 25s, which was announced in the budget, which sounds like a genuine opportunity. I came through an apprenticeship myself. How should business owners be thinking about using this, especially in light of the wage increase that you just touched on?
What I'd say is people need to work smarter, not necessarily cut people. So apprenticeships are a big part of that. You've got two forces hitting at once, right? You've got the higher wage floors and free, cheaper training for young staff. But the strategic play is to reshape the workforce mix, not just existing staff. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what the apprenticeship allows you to be able to do, is actually bring in people and use them in the right way. You can't expect an apprentice to come in at a manager level or any of that type of stuff. So the training that they're going to be offering, I think, will make a big difference. But the most important thing is people really have to leverage it. It's so easy that people sometimes think apprenticeships and apprentices are cheap labor, right? To an extent, unfortunately. But, many, many years ago, I was the equivalent of an apprentice. I joined something called the Youth Training Scheme back in the government. That was probably about 30, 40 years ago. But back then, it was probably the equivalent of. And yes, I was accepted, but I spent 10 years at that first company and then went all the way through from a junior to a manager to a director, and then at the end I was one of the most senior people in that organization. So there is absolutely the possibility to use them, but you've got to use them in the right way and make sure that you don't just use them for those mundane tasks, right? You've got to give them growth, right? If you don't get the best out of them and see their potential, then it almost be a waste of your time and their time.
Definitely, and I guess the other way SMBs can use this free apprenticeship training is to actually upskill existing staff members that are obviously under 25 as well, by doing potentially leadership management apprenticeship or data or whatever it may be. And I guess that would also be a good way to use this as well. But obviously the national living wage is increasing from £12.21 to £12.71. And we've already flagged that SMBs obviously need to forecast how that's going to impact them. Walk us through why waiting could be dangerous.
Look, if you wait until next spring to run the numbers, you've already signed customer contracts by then. You've staffed rotas and you've already set prices. And that doesn't cover your new cost base of bringing on new individuals or people. So for labour-heavy businesses, you think about hospitality, you think about care, you think about retail, logistics, that can quietly turn a thin profit into a loss. So you don't want to wait 12 to 18 months. What you want to do now is really think about scenario planning. Try and think about what would happen if wage costs went up by 5%, 10%, 15%, and almost try and predict the future to an extent, right? Get out your crystal ball, but that's not always necessarily going to be possible because some people actually don't have the skills to be able to do that. That's where accountants and bookkeepers play a big role, or your accounting professionals, to really help you in what will that potentially look like in future. And that to me is the most important thing, is just try it, model it, see what it looks like, see what the impact is, and try and forward plan.
Definitely. And what's a piece of advice you would give to small businesses that are potentially struggling at the moment and know that this wage increase might tip them over?
It would be exactly that. Just try and model out what the various scenarios actually mean and engage with those accountants and bookkeepers who can actually help you model it. Not everybody has the experience and expertise, and a small business owner, and I used to be one many years ago. When I started out, my accountant was my best friend and, was my advisor not only to me on accounting issues, but I could almost take anything to him. He'd have experience in HR related issues, some legal issues, and some of the other components, and you don't necessarily always have that readily available. So for me, that's the thing I would advise is try it, model out what that looks like, but seek professional, experienced individuals who have done this before.
100%. And so moving on to tax planning, obviously there's been a 2% increase in dividend and saving income. For limited company directors and also normal people as well, what effect do you think this will have on them? And should they be re-looking at the dividend versus salary split again?
I think this is going to be, it really depends on how you've set up your business in the first place. If you set yourself up as a dividend-based organisation, are you limited, are you an unlimited company, everybody needs to absolutely set up the structure that suits them. And people don't necessarily know what that is. And again, it's all about seeking advice, speak to experienced individuals, people who know the intricacies of how should I set up, should I give myself a dividend every year, what's the tax implications of that. Some people just think it used to be a simple way of almost evading tax to a certain extent, but the way that it's sort of coming out now, it's almost like it's such a difficult decision to make. So seeking advice is the most important thing, right? Don't feel that everything you find online is necessarily going to give you the answer. So seeking professional advice and support is the best way of doing that.
Definitely. And we've heard a lot of the term stealth tax. Would you be able to just explain in really simple terms what that is?
Look, stealth tax is, almost the definition of the word stealth is that you can't actually see it, right? And it's sort of invisible to the human eye. And I think that's very much what we're talking about here, is that a perfect example is what's just recently happened in the budget. When you think about, there's relief on one side for small businesses, when you think about things like business rate cuts and the ability for businesses, especially in retail, and I think they were talking about hospitality, about getting some relief in those areas. But then on the other side, you start then seeing increases still in the national insurance hike that was happened last year. Some of that is still going to be coming through this year. So when you start looking at it individually, you get some sort of benefit. But when you start putting it all together and you start looking at some of the taxes that you really sure whether or not you were going to hit with them. I think that's what they mean by stealth. It's like all of a sudden it comes in from left field, you weren't expecting it, and then all of a sudden it, again, just impacts your business without realizing. And to me, that's the importance of really finding individuals and people who can help support you and using all the various avenues for understanding what are the implications on my business. Because some of the statements that come out are very generic, and when they're so generic, you don't really know, right? I spent time last night trying to uncover it myself with many years of experience of dealing with tax and everything else, and I was still walking away slightly confused on what it meant for me as a CEO of running a business and trying to understand the intricacies. So, having finance teams around and just asking them to sort of summarize what are the implications on our business, again, is, even for somebody who's as seasoned as I am, I can just imagine how difficult it's going to be for a small business owner.
Definitely, and I think there's a lot of noise on social media as well, a lot of almost fear-mongering or just pulling out the headlines that people know will go viral or get clicks, which almost then scares other SMBs and are worried. So where would you suggest that they go to get important, correct information?
Any small business owner will have a relationship with an accountant or bookkeeper. I'd say that should be your primary because they know these things inside out. And then, there are other HM Treasury online portal gives you a lot of information around trying to summarize a lot of that, and also some of the government, the accounting bodies. So I was looking at this morning at the ICAEW website, and one of the things it did really well was actually summarize what the impact is on individuals, on business owners, and those sort of things. So there is a lot of material out there, but as you said, if you go to the wrong one and it's scaremongering and starts telling you all the things that are potentially going to go wrong, that in itself is going to be dangerous. So I would say just go to recognized good accounting bodies, go to trusted sources for that information.
100%. And so tax and national insurance levels are frozen until 2028. On the surface, obviously, that sounds like stability because we had the previous hike. But with wage inflation and other changes, what's the real impact for SMBs?
Yeah, look, there was quite a lot there, right? In relation to, there was a salary sacrifice on pensions, right, which was one of the big things. And, that's going to have a massive impact on SMBs specifically, because when you think about that's sort of one of the simple examples of where effective tools for SMBs could be used to actually boost their overall payroll budget, right? And understanding what those intricacies are. I know it's not until 2029, but I think that was one of the things that I picked up on the budget yesterday. There was a lot of things that are in 28, 29 and beyond that won't impact them with immediate effect. So some of the things that we already discussed around planning, understanding all the intricacies, what that means from your own salary wage bill and those sort of things, I think is going to be the most important thing that people really need to think about.
Definitely. As we just said, from 2029, the salary sacrifice pension over £2,000 will be taxed the same way as other pensions. So obviously we've said about planning, but actually what's practical things that SMBs can be doing?
Well, the most important thing is really understanding who in your business is actually impacted, right? So map out those who are affected so that you can start having those conversations with the individuals, because the more you get ahead of it, the less impact on your employees and the teams around you. The other thing is actually stress test the overall benefits package that you're actually offering to individuals. And what we mean by that is, look, if the tax advantage falls away, does your offer still look competitive against other individuals and other organizations out there, right? Because we all know that there is going to be quite a large, and there is today, competition around hiring of individuals and people, especially as professions change. I had a statistic that sort of said, look, in 2030, the jobs that are available in 2030, some of which don't even exist today. So you're not necessarily looking for people who are qualified. You're going to be looking at all of the other attributes, right? People who have resilience and competitiveness and people who have a different way of thinking and going about solving issues and problems, especially with AI and all the other technology out there. So for me, it's really about, especially with key people, talk early, understand what drives them, and see what things like the salary sacrifice will actually have as an impact on them personally, right, as well as professionally, especially when we talked about the pensions piece as well, just with it being capped, it's almost like they may have already had plans and future plans, and that will have an impact for them.
And so back to business rates, can you sort of break that down and explain what business rates are first, and then we can delve into the reforms?
Yeah, look, business rates is, again, you could call it almost a bit like a stealth tax, right? Yet another rate of tax that government bodies tend to charge for organizations based on their overall profitability and the way that they're actually going about making business. But it's also in relation to how well they're performing, right? So again, just really about their overall performance. There's real relief in here. You won't feel it automatically with all the changes that they sort of recommended yesterday. So when you think about shops, hospitality, you think about leisure businesses, they talked about potentially lower business rates for those types of organizations, or even frozen at some point. But the system is one of the most complex ways of trying to work out who do I charge and how much do I charge each individual business. And I think that's going to be the challenge of how do I know all of the things that were announced yesterday, what impact does it have on me based on the type of business that I actually am.
And when are these business rates reforms coming in? Is this something that's imminent or coming a bit deferred like pensions?
Yeah, look, I think it's a great question because I don't think it was extremely clear yesterday, because I think it was also talking about how they were going to potentially offer, based on hospitality, based on the type of industry you were, some relief. Mm-hmm. A lot of those businesses are going to be looking for that relief almost immediately, right? They are struggling now with all of the major changes. So some of that I would really hope is going to come in extremely quickly, hopefully within the next tax year, hopefully, or at the start of the next tax year. But, that was one of the comments earlier was a lot of the changes, like the 26 billion, don't kick in immediately. So if you're a small business owner today, you really going to feel that benefit in the short term? I don't think you will, right? It's going to be something, if you're medium to long term, then you potentially get some benefit, but people need that relief today. They've struggled for the last year with all of the other changes. So if the government needs to do something, they need to do it pretty quick in order to have the impact.
If you were in government now, what are some proposed changes you would have liked to see for SMBs?
Yeah, look, we know there is a lot of regulatory legislation requirements on small business owners. They don't have the time to be able to pull off half the stuff the government asks them to do from a reporting, from a tax and submission perspective. So I'd love to have seen some sort of relief for organisations so that they could actually go about adopting technology. I think, to me, right, now obviously you'd expect, being a technology leader, that's what I want, but I go back to when I ran my small business. If I had half the technology I had today, the amount of time it would have freed up for me to just be able to go off and do other stuff, right? Whether that's from a personal perspective or just a work-life balance, but I was just spending far too much time on stuff that now you can just get literally done in seconds, right? Automation and the ability to report information and data. And we know that with HMRC and Making Tax Digital and some of the requirements they got coming out, I know one of the things they mentioned yesterday was about potentially doing e-invoicing in future. All of that requires businesses to invest in technology. And I would love to have seen something where they're giving some sort of relief or some benefit to businesses so that they could go about investing. We all know that, especially with AI and technology and everything else, things are getting faster, easier, smarter, but it'd be great if there was some help for the small businesses so that they could actually try it.
Definitely, and I think with MTD and e-invoicing being announced, I think small businesses will have to invest a lot more into their tech software, where actually they don't have a lot of disposable income to do so at the moment, but the government just presume that they will. At Dext, we know that running a business shouldn't be about the busy work. You've set out to build something on your own, to make time, dream big, and do more. But receipts are everywhere. Invoices get lost. Your inbox never stops. Then you're stuck trying to make the numbers make sense. Dext is the all-in-one bookkeeping automation platform. It's simple, accurate, and all in real time. Just how bookkeeping should be. Your financial data right where it needs to be, with you finally building bigger things. Go to dext.com to find out more.
Yeah, you might have the ability to invest a little, but you don't have this experience and expertise of knowing what the right packages are. So, with Making Tax Digital, one of the things at least the government did was have some sort of validation process with software vendors and making sure that they were certified on the ability to be able to report correctly and those sort of things. So now that they've sort of taken that first step of certifying them, wouldn't it be great if they could then turn around and say, well, actually, if you use any of these certified packages, we will give you some relief to be able to then verify that the information that we receive is fully validated, it's compliant, and it gives us everything that we need. They're not doing that. They're just literally relying on the SMBs to determine what packages they use. And it could be somebody that's not even on the official list, or bridging software, or something that's manually done by somebody. And I think that's going to be a real challenge for not only for our industry in general, to make sure, because we want to make sure that and we hold all ourselves to account, the same way I hold the ecosystem to account, because we want to make sure that at the end of the day, SMBs thrive, and they're the backbone of the entire UK economy. If they fail, we all fail. And that's something that we take to heart, and we really want to make sure that people get all the benefits they possibly can. And I think government plays a major role in enabling that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been speaking with other small business owners, and obviously being a small business owner myself, it feels like when you start a business, there's so much risk. You've left a stable job, you've gone out on your own, and now we have been creating jobs for other people, which is lovely, and paying all of our taxes and VAT and corp tax and etc., etc. But it feels, for some clients I know, they feel like it's just another tax hike after another, when actually they've taken the risk to be innovative and create something new.
Yeah. And if you think about what happened after, what you just mentioned there is a perfect example of exactly what happened after COVID, right? If you look at all of the businesses that grew outside of and after COVID, it was not the big, large organizations. It was all of these individuals and people that used the opportunity to either reinvent themselves, had side hustles, started their businesses. All of a sudden, more and more people bought online, and it just reinvigorated the small business market and ecosystem in general. And that was probably one of the best things I think that could have come out of COVID, right? I know a lot of bad stuff came out, but one of the good things that we saw was just the number of small business owners that invested and reinvented themselves. But we've got to allow them now and encourage them to continue on that path and continue to grow. And this last budget didn't do that.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. So obviously we've spoke about yourself being an SMB owner, and obviously using AI would have saved you so much time. So can you give us some real examples of where AI can remove manual admin work?
Yeah, the very simple stuff, right, of just a receipt or an invoice, right, that comes into your business. There's not one business, doesn't matter how big, small, large you are, or an enterprise. Everybody has receipts, everybody has invoices. Most of the time, there's still a lot of people who send you invoices and receipts manually through email, through WhatsApp, through any different medium. And most of the time what people end up doing is looking at the invoice, coding it, re-entering all that same information into a general ledger or an accounting system or something like that. But wouldn't it be great if you just could send that to a system and it just did everything for you, right? And when you process hundreds and thousands of invoices on an annual basis, the amount of time that you save, and it's a mundane task, right? It's probably the thing I always remember many years ago when my small business was in hospitality, and I owned a jazz club with my brother. Then the amount of receipts and invoices you can imagine in the hospitality sector, you're getting deliveries every day, not only food but drink, and we had a side restaurant. So every day we were probably receiving, I would say, close to 10 to 15 invoices. You times that by 5, 6, 7 days a week, and you're talking close to 100. So 400 invoices. If that took me on average 4 or 5 minutes per invoice, and some of them were quite detailed, so let's take an average of 5, you're talking close to about 8 or 9 hours a month. If I could have saved that and it was just fully automated, and the thing is, what it doesn't tell you is all the errors I used to make when I was entering it, and all the checks I had to do, and then trying to work out which one do I pay first. And sometimes it used to do almost like, because I had to do it almost in my spare time, you find out that I've actually missed a payment or I missed a invoice because you're collating this shoebox full of receipts. And sometimes I used to actually lose invoices. So if that was fully automated, right, and had that ability to just take that away, I could have used that time for doing other stuff. So that's a perfect example. And you can use it from almost any perspective, right? So that's one aspect. The other aspect, especially for a small business owner, is all the stuff we've been talking about now in relation to tax, understanding how do I prepare that type of information. There's lots of tax software out there. I've now got the requirement for feeding this information into HMRC and doing the stuff in Making Tax Digital. Again, why would you want to do that manually? Right? Find a way of automating all of the tax returns and all of the reporting. Another perfect one is customers, right? I think AI, the number one use case used by everybody is around customer experience and customer support. So if you had an issue and you had a question, do I really want to speak to a person, or am I quite happy going to a knowledge base where it has all of the frequently asked questions and you can find almost the answer that you're looking for? It's a great use of AI in your own business so that you're not distracting all of your own team to answer and being at the end of a phone call. So there's numerous use cases. But again, go back to, I think, your previous question, what government could have done. There are so many different technologies out there that could make a small business owner so much more productive. Why not give them the ability and to use it, leverage it, and give them some allowances?
Yeah, 100%. So, new HMRC enforcement teams are coming, and can you unpack what that means and how we can protect business owners if they may be at risk?
Yeah, look, one of the things that people need to really do, again, is, I think they announced yesterday some of the penalties that people are potentially going to be getting from an HMRC's perspective, and introducing that for late payments and those sort of things from a MTD perspective. And the most important thing, again, it just goes back to having technology, having software that can remind you of what needs to be done when, because sometimes it's probably the biggest thing that people forget about is what are all the various deadlines, timelines that I need to adhere to, and it's not necessarily always known by small business owners. So for me, it's a case of, it's fine putting in all these penalties and regulations and everything else. It's almost like sometimes there's stealth penalties, right? You don't necessarily understand which ones you're going to get at what point.
Yeah.
So again, I think it really just comes down to clear, concise ways of communicating that out to small business owners. But again, having an accountant or bookkeeper that knows those things and can help control a lot of the narrative for you, tell you what's going on, tell you where your deadlines are, helping you with all your various activities, I think is, again, probably my piece of advice for them is just engage with individuals and people that know all of those timelines so that you don't necessarily get hit with whatever it is that HMRC are going to put out there as potential issues or consequences of not adhering to their various rules. And their rules change constantly.
Yeah.
So again, it's just finding really good sources, trusted websites, or working with accountants and bookkeepers, of course, as being your primary source of reference.
Definitely. And so we've touched on e-invoicing, but obviously HMRC is shifting to real-time tax and compliance with tighter penalties, in-year collection and e-invoicing from 2029. For someone running a small business, what does this shift actually feel like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, for a small business, real-time tax mandatory e-invoicing will feel like moving from almost like an annual exam to a continuous assessment. Instead of businesses having to scramble once a year or once a quarter, your invoices, VAT, over time, more of your tax data will flow to HMRC as you trade. We've seen this e-invoicing already in Australia. We've seen it now as a legislative requirement in France. Canada are talking about doing it, so we weren't surprised that the UK at some point were going to do it. But day to day, what it basically means is that you'll spend less time on big, painful returns, right? But only if your data is as clean as you go along. All of your errors and amendments will be picked up a lot faster, with penalties more closely tied to late or incorrect reporting, hence the reason why having clean data is going to be so important. And I think also the line between finance systems and tax systems will basically disappear, because we all know the way that it works today is you sort of feed everything into one system, and then on a regular basis, just before your tax return is due, you then go and put it into a tax system. You won't need to be doing that anymore, because every single invoice, every single receipt, almost at the point at which it gets created or gets processed, all of that information will be readily available to you, and obviously to the government. I think the other benefit, some elements of e-invoicing, is if you're processing and understand your tax position almost immediately every time you process a receipt or invoice, the number one reason why small businesses fail is because they don't necessarily have insight into cash flow. If you're processing all your receipts and invoices almost readily available, almost instantaneously, you understand your tax exposure almost straight away, and then you're not going to be able to necessarily have to pay any penalties, because it's all being processed real time. So I think that's going to be a real benefit for businesses as well. But most importantly, probably the thing that we haven't really mentioned in any of this, it's a massive culture shift for a lot of organizations, because they're not used to doing it almost every single day and every single week an invoice comes in. It's still that I'll just worry about it at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter. So yeah, I think it's going to be a big culture shift, and the earlier that people start thinking about it and starting to adopt it is going to really help them benefit, but also then get used to the process.
Definitely, I think just as human beings, not very good with change, and so now changing to do it on such a regular basis will be such a difference. I think especially with e-invoicing coming in, I think that will be a massive shock to the system.
Yeah.
To say the least. But what's a conversation business owners should be having with their accountant and bookkeeper right now about budget changes and digital transformation?
Probably turn it round to two questions, right? It's almost like, given this budget, where am I exposed? Because going back to accountants and bookkeepers being the more experienced individuals, and this is what they do every day. And they should know my business well enough that I wouldn't know what the right question is to ask them on, how does national insurance affect me? How does the business rates and everything else? So I would almost throw the question back to them and say, look, based on what you know about my business, where am I exposed? Is there any areas that I should really look into? And then we can have a two-way conversation about it. So I think that's one thing, right? Whether it's wages, dividends, property, imports, compliance, MTD, e-invoicing, there's so many things to unpack. I wouldn't even know where to start as a small business owner. So that's my first question would be back. The second question I'd go back is, what are the top 3 digital changes we can make in the next 12 months to protect cash flow and reduce the risk in my business? Because, again, it comes back to some of the things we talked about, which is if you can automate and you can find ways that can give me more accurate, real-time, clean data, the chances are if I have all of that, I can then do something with it. So reduce my exposure. How can I better adopt tools, technology to be able to help me do those things? And again, accountants and the ecosystem will probably have a better idea of what the right tools are to be able to reduce that exposure for me. My forte in a small business is the stuff that I do every single day, right? It's my retail, it's my selling. I could be a manufacturer, I could be building stuff. I'm an entrepreneur in those areas. I'm not an entrepreneur in finance and accounting. I'll let somebody else who's more experienced do that. So, fundamentally, those are the 2 questions I'd be asking.
100%. And so one of the final questions is, with corporation tax staying stable, new investment incentives, but rising cost and compliance pressures, are you optimistic or concerned about the environment for UK small businesses?
Honestly, both. Right? I think that I'm concerned because tax burdens are rising. We talked about the wage costs are rising and compliance expectations are getting tougher. And we all know small businesses feel those changes probably more so than medium to large organizations. But I'm optimistic. And what drives me for that is that the tools and incentives now available, from full expensing to apprenticeship to AI, mean that the gap between a highly productive small business and an average one is getting wider. But owners who lean into data, into digital and skills can absolutely thrive in the current environment. The risk is leaving too many good businesses behind because they're too stretched and can't make that transition. So again, it's not a case of anybody's being constrained, right? Which is the reason why I'm optimistic. It's like the businesses that really want to go out and have the ability, those are the businesses that we see day in, day out who are, thriving, they're growing, and you see they're investing in their employees, they're investing in development and everything else. It's those organizations that don't have that growth mindset will be the ones who are going to sort of fail by the wayside. And that's where my concerns are, is giving them more help, giving them more support, helping them as much as you possibly can. So that's the reason why I look at it as a sort of a balanced view. There's a fair amount of optimism, but still concerns.
Definitely. And so we've covered a lot. And if you were with a business owner that was feeling overwhelmed right now, what is one action they should take this week?
The first thing I would say is book time with an accountant or bookkeeper. Book some time with an individual who can actually help you navigate through all the major changes and how do you use them to your own benefit. We talked about many of these things. In that time frame, talk about what impact it has. Ask the 2 questions that I referenced. Ask them about what technology is out there that I can potentially use. What are some of the advantages that I can take use of that the government have just released, especially around, should I go and take on an apprenticeship, right? If I did, how do I even go about doing that? Getting in touch with the right types of organizations and those sort of things. So, but book a session now, right? And just ask those basic questions and see how they can really help you navigate all of the intricacies, because nobody's going to sit there for, I don't know what the final timing of her speech was, but nobody's going to sit there for 2.5 hours, be able to come away and say, actually, I know exactly the 3 things that I need to go do. That's, to me, the first piece of advice I'd give any business owner out there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on.